Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Let's check my levels really quick. How do I sound? Sorry for the glitch earlier. I actually was not ready yet, as you could tell, but I forgot to put the song on the loop. So let me know how I sound, all right? I have a question for you all. I can check it myself as well. Um, okay, it's not on the software I use, StreamYard. The logo here is right here is flashing in and out. Super annoying, but it doesn't look like it's doing that on YouTube. So where is everyone this evening, guys? Guys, this is a much smaller stream than usual. We have 108 likes, 133 viewers right now. Let's keep boosting the viewership by liking, by sharing. I've been averaging around 800, 1,000, sometimes more than 1,000 viewers. Maybe it's the topic tonight. I don't know. I have no idea. Um, Someone said the audio is perhaps a little hot. Let me turn that down a little because I did turn it up a little. Let me see. How about now? Let me know. Oh, now people say audio could be louder. All right. So keep giving me that audio check. Let me know if I'm loud enough. Some people said I'm a little quiet. Let me see if I can adjust that for you. All right. All right. Keep liking the video, of course. Sharing this stream, hitting that like button. The best way to support, though, and I'm going to take out these headphones for now. Best way to support is patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. We're at the beginning of the month. We have some very exciting streams. As you know, I interviewed Claire Daly recently. That was earlier this month, the December 2nd. You want to check that playback. I'll be posting clips as well. Don't worry about it. But yeah, make sure that you are hitting that like button. But supporting this channel is really important. Patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Let's get more people in here. All right. Let me just let you know a few things. All right. We're going to start a little chill, and then I'll get to the content at about 5-10 minutes. So I'm feeling better, but I did have my first bout of COVID-19. That was really interesting. So my wife, she works at the hospital. She probably got it there, and then she had no idea that she had it. It was a pretty mild case, especially in the beginning. She had no idea if she just had post-nasal drip. So we hadn't even tested. She hadn't even tested until multiple days afterwards. So there was just no chance for either of us. We tried to isolate in the first few days, and I got sick, I think 3 days after she did. And then, the most annoying thing are the tests for me, because while I wasn't feeling all that bad, I was starting to get a fever, and I was like, okay, do I have it or do I not? And the tests kept on coming out negative, which was very frustrating. And it just took a while. Some people say it takes the test a little while to to actually test positive when you finally have symptoms. So anyway, that happened. I took a few days rest, but by the time Claire Daly's interview came around, I was like, well, this is an opportunity I don't want to miss. It's hard to schedule busy people like members of the European Parliament, like Claire Daly. So I went ahead with it. I was not feeling the best, but I think given that my fever was mainly down and that I wasn't feeling too congested, I was able to do it, and it was a great interview. So this is my first stream back since then, and we got a packed week coming up. I'll give you some announcements. So Friday, I'm going to have Brian Berletic and Carl Za on the program Friday late evening. I'm going to probably start earlier without them because I know, a 10 p.m. Eastern start time is kind of late. So I think I'm going to start with some content of my own in the beginning, and then we'll go to them at about 10 p.m. Eastern time and probably be on with them for, an hour to 90 minutes. That should be a great conversation. So be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit that notifications bell so you're notified. Not many people were able to take the poll before the stream started, but it seems like people are getting notified, but sometimes the stream just isn't boosted. So keep boosting it. Keep liking this video. We have about 162 likes, 206 watching. Let's try to get that up to 200 as quickly as we can. All right. So then on Monday, I'm going to have Jeffrey Sachs on. All right. So that's a really exciting one. Jeffrey Sachs, Monday, noon Eastern time. We're going to talk about Russia, Ukraine, China. We're going to be talking about all the foreign policy topics, the mainstream Western media. So we have a packed show coming up, especially toward the latter half of this week to the next week. All right. So this program is growing, and I want to keep seeing it grow. And so today I thought I would take a different direction. Okay. Today I want to, and at the end I'll thank the super chats. All right. But I wanted to go a different direction, see what you all think of this. Now, I know that I've said in the past, oh, I'll never react to other streamers and whatnot. Well, I think that I've been doing some thinking. I'm like, there's might be some utility to this. Not in the sense of getting into some kind of whatever, like chest thumping match or dick swinging match or whatever it may be. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But there are some times when events, I did it with Kyle Kalinske, and I'm going to do it today with Vosh. And the reason why I'm going to do it today with Vosh, and some people already had some disagreements with this, is because I thought that this event, these protests that happened in China, are one of those events that need so much understanding, right? That there's such a blackout, and not just in the mainstream Western media. It's not just the mainstream corporate media blacking it out. It's also independent media not really talking about it. So I said to myself, well, who is talking about it, and who should I be responding to in terms of that? And so when I saw Vaush's content, somebody sent it to me. I thought to myself, well, this is really awful. This is really cringe. But at the same time, people need to know how to counter it. So that's why I'm going to start off today's program with that. All right. I don't watch Vosh. I don't think his content is particularly good. I don't think that it particularly offers anything. I don't think that he's a socialist. I don't think he's an anti-imperialist. I think at best he is a liberal imperialist. At best he is a bread tube imperialist, meaning he just makes money off of YouTube. And when he talks politics about anything relating to foreign policy, he's mainly just spewing imperialism. At worst, he's an agent of the state, right? At worst. I don't have any evidence of that directly, but we do know that the ways in which Vosh is promoted in the algorithm. I swear, I don't even follow this guy on Twitter, but every single time he tweets, Twitter will put progressive media above his name and promote the tweet. And then, of course, he ends up trending and all of this nonsense. So in a sense, there's something going on there. When your politics are so friendly and your following is so loyal to the diktats of imperialism that these corporations are going to promote you. We don't get that here on YouTube on this channel. They're not really promoting us. It's you guys. It's everyone here. That's why I say like this video, support the channel, right? We're only 7 likes away from 200, so keep those likes coming. Get more people into this stream because that's what's been growing this, right? And then interacting with those forces who are doing similar work, right? Those channels like the Duran, like Scott Ritter, like Ben Norton, like so many others, like Brian Berletic, right? Those forces that are doing the work, who are generous enough to offer their time to talk about really important things. That's what's growing this channel right now. And so I want to thank all of you for your support. But I also just want to say that, that's kind of Vosh in a nutshell for me. But I thought it was important to begin today talking about his protest take because, first of all, there's just there's so many misconceptions about these protests. We've already gone over them here on this channel. But there's also a fundamental position about China that is so popular among these liberal imperialists, these neoliberal imperialists, that I think deserves further analysis and also further takedowns, because it's on this subject, I think, that people are the weakest. And you'll see that in the next segment with John Mearsheimer, right? You have so many people who have come out against against the proxy war in Ukraine, who will call out Vosh for that. But when his videos surface about China, it's mostly silence, right? And this is the case for a lot of different elements and forces within this media ecosystem, this independent media ecosystem. So let's get started. All right, let's get started with Vosh. So I'm going to play this. All right, I'm going to share what he had to say, but I'm not going to play the whole thing. It was a 20-minute video. We're going to start about at the halfway point and see how far we get. I may just rage quit. Just kidding. I'm not going to rage quit on my own stream, but I may rage quit watching this depending on how bad it gets. I did watch this thing all the way through one time, but we will have to we'll have to get through this together. All right. So where are we? Here we go. So he says the COVID lockdowns in China are so bad, he says. All right. So here's the video. Okay, you have the little that's annoying. So here we go. The COVID lockdowns in China are so bad. So first of all, I just want to say that these protests are over. We have to just start with that. By the time this video had come out, these protests had essentially ended. So we're already starting from a point where he's not even reacting to the right thing, because he already went over Western corporate media sources and how bad it is and all the coverage on it, right? Not really challenging any of it, but he's already starting from the point of being behind history, because these protests had ended well before the video was even published, because China had already responded. And to be honest, they had been responding to this discontent around their COVID measures over time, even before these protests started. But no, let's just begin, and then I'll stop as he speaks. All right. So let's do this.
When faced with a natural disaster like COVID-19, countries are going to respond in ways that reflect their national competencies, right? So countries that have well-developed healthcare systems, for example, might use those to provide treatment, expand healthcare options, maybe go to people's homes so they don't have to travel and risk stuff. Countries with high productive capabilities can mass produce ventilators and tests and so on. Countries like China are really good at building concentration camps and state surveillance. So that's what.
So he's already on his BS, right? Because first of all, the first two things that he said, right? Providing more healthcare to people, being able to produce ventilators and these things. This is exactly what China did early on. I mean, this is what's so frustrating about someone like Vosh, is that they don't even do any homework. They don't even look into what did China do early on in the pandemic. It did produce ventilators. It was supplying ventilators to the United States, which didn't have enough. It was doing that. And it has been sending things like masks and ventilators abroad since the very beginning of this thing, because they reoriented their production lines in order to meet the needs associated with this pandemic. That was very early on. We're talking about February, March, April, May of 2020. We're not talking about 2022 of December, right? So he's already starting from the premise that China is really good at building concentration camps, CIA talking point number one. But it didn't do those other things. But it actually did do those other things. Early on in March of 2020, February of 2020, you had thousands of doctors from all over China going, 10,000 doctors all over China going to Wuhan to help the epicenter. And I can't believe I have to talk about COVID again, because I don't really do it on this channel. But he is not even starting from the premise of any facts. Just, oh, well, China does surveillance in concentration camps really well, but it doesn't do healthcare. Absolutely bogus. And so he's already starting off with these propaganda talking points. Concentration camps, here we go.
So they did. That sounds like me being flippant, but I'm being serious when I say that. Seriously, the state apparatus has a high degree of competency when it comes to tracking its citizens, monitoring their presence, requiring things of them on a day-to-day basis, and building large, featureless gray concrete blocks that they can stuff people into. I'm not joking. That's seriously, that's what they can do. And they've done it. And frankly, they've done it really, really, really well. It's just the thing that they're doing really well maybe isn't actually the best thing. See, we got to understand this, okay? COVID-19 was a problem with no perfect solution.
So, first off, again, no facts. There's no evidence. He's not saying, well, here's how China did these awful things, right? Stuffing people into concrete buildings in featureless blocks. He doesn't even give any evidence. What he's probably referring to is the so-called Uyghur concentration camps narrative, which how many times has been debunked on this channel from that awful Office of the Human Rights Commission report, which wasn't even written by Michelle Bachelet on the last day of her tenure there. But this has been circulating for quite some time, that China is so great at imprisoning people, right? When he could literally be talking about the United States right now. How about the Patriot Act? How about the mass being really great at state surveillance? The United States is unmatched in state surveillance. The United States has perfected state surveillance so much that people don't even talk about it. How many people are actually talking about Julian Assange, are actually talking about the Patriot Act, are actually talking about Rover wiretapping and all these things? Not many, because people have accepted it for the most part. People say, oh, I didn't do anything. And then when Julian Assange happens, they say, well, I don't know anything about that. I didn't do anything wrong. The United States has divided people, has confused people so much on this issue of surveillance that they have people thinking China is the one who has a worse surveillance apparatus than the United States. Meanwhile, you have people like Brian Berletic showing, and Ian Goodrum, real journalists, showing that things like the so-called social credit system don't even exist, that they don't even exist in a real way, that really all we're talking about is similar kinds of credit systems and credit check systems and things like that around just ordinary things, financial crimes, social crimes that, in most societies are considered wrong to do, like stealing subway tickets, like having your dog unleashed, these kind of things. But this China concentration camp narrative is so convenient in a society in the United States. It's such great red under the bed propaganda because it can get you thinking about anything else except the 2 million people inside of prisons in the United States, and the fact that that system is wholly and totally racist, and that it imprisons nearly half of the people in there are Black people, indigenous people, people of color. This is how ridiculous this all sounds. China is so good at surveillance when it comes to COVID that's why it's so bad. That's why everything is going so badly. It flies in the face of reality. This isn't to say that there aren't real problems that people are starting to have and have started to build up around some of these COVID measures, especially in the local areas. People have been getting angry at certain excesses, at things that are being done too much. It's a lot easier, for example, when you see one COVID-19 case test positive, to do a very centralized, a very universal lockdown in a certain area and then mass test everyone, rather than do measures that fit the particular locality that you're talking about. And this is what was happening in China a lot. The pandemic has been going on for quite a long time. And so local officials especially got, kind of dragged their feet and said, well, we're tired. Everyone's tired. We're just going to go through the motions. And people started to feel like that was disruptive. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't based on the situation in their community. And it was disrupting economic life and social life. And yes, people were starting to get angry. But what he's talking about here is big bad Chinese government is destroying people's lives. And that's absolute. Not only is that not true, but of course, it goes against what actually is the problem here. And that is that he could be talking about the United States and we wouldn't even know any different. But the fact is, he's just inserted China instead because, it is profitable to slander China, especially in a moment when there was some, albeit very small and short lived, unrest.
It seems like COVID-19, at least for right now, is here to stay. That's not defeatism on my part. It's just we have the cold, we have the flu, we have COVID-19. Is that bad? Yes. Is that still true? Yes, also still true. The vaccines that we've developed to mitigate, to protect people against COVID-19 are very good. If you're fully vaxxed boosted, if you've taken all the jabs, if you've gotten all the Fauci ouchies, your odds of dying or sustaining serious injury are far lower than they were before. They reduce the likelihood of long COVID, of which we have an enormous amount. Tens of millions of people all around the world have long-term neurological, psychological, physiological damage as a product of long COVID. It's very unfortunate. I know people who have those feelings. I think Merrick talks about it a decent amount on Twitter. Not good. Get your vaccines, because even if everyone is eventually guaranteed to get COVID, and while no one's guaranteed to get it, it certainly seems likely, given enough time, that everyone will. You're far more likely to end up healthy on the other end if you have your vaccinations. See, there's Merrick. Speak of the not devil. Hello. Permanently damaged lungs. That's not good. There is no perfect response to COVID-19. There just isn't. But there are two basic things every country should.
So I just want to let you know that I'm not going to comment on those very medically science kind of conversations. I just want to say that what he just did right there is deflect from the topic of the conversation. He just said a bunch of BS with no evidence behind it, and then decided to go on about a minute long rant about how long COVID isn't good and how COVID is here to stay. That's not good. But he has deflected now from the top of the conversation, and he's about to get back into it. But what this serves, and this is very strategic. This is intentional. This is not just him going on some kind of tangent. He is strategically, and that's why I think, BreadTube, they have this kind of operative sense to them in the way that they go about things, in their method. It's not just that their politics are trash. It's also that the way they go about arguing their points is deflection. It's about changing the subject. It's about straw man argumentation. It's all about getting you to stop thinking about what is necessary to understand, which are the facts of the situation. We'll get into those. He's about to get into some more State Department propaganda. Here you go.
Focus on, right? Okay. Make sure that you always have enough hospital beds for the people who need ventilators, and make sure everyone gets access to vaccines as readily as they are produced and made available. Those are the two things that we know work, that don't come at any cost. They don't hurt people to do. That's what should be focused on. That's the kicker right there. The problem is that other steps you can take to mitigate the spread of COVID have diminishing returns and sometimes negative externalities. We complained about the lockdowns here in the United States. You have any idea how bad things are in China? People are.
So there you go again, right? He is literally trying to lead into some smears on China by deflecting from the shortcomings of the very empire that he lives in. So he's talking about how there are two things you can do. You got to increase hospital beds, and you got to make sure everyone has vaccines. But the fact of the matter is that China has literally done everything. You don't have to agree with what they've done, but certainly you have to understand that China has been one of the few countries that has tried absolutely everything. China has done months-long lockdowns like you saw in Wuhan. You've seen targeted quarantine. That's kind of been the case since the end of Wuhan, April 2020. China has been more doing targeted measures where there are universal, everyone wears masks in public places, the economy gets going, and then when there are outbreaks, there are targeted kind of lockdowns in certain maybe counties, localities, townships, villages, and try to mitigate the spread that way. China has also built hospitals. He's saying you should have more hospital beds. While China said, we don't have enough hospital beds. We're a developing country, so we have to build more. And that's what China has done throughout this process. Those so-called quarantine facilities are really just makeshift hospitals. It's to treat people who have these illnesses. One of the problems that China has come about now that they've had to confront is the fact that now that the Omicron variant is less lethal, at least in the aggregate, right? They still want to protect the elderly because it can be quite lethal for them. But at the same time, they have come up against the fact that some people have very severe medical conditions already. And so for those who have severe medical conditions, need treatments, and do not have COVID, what does it mean for them to have to go to a quarantine facility just because they have been maybe exposed to COVID-19, or maybe they have live in a community that has rising cases of COVID-19? You could very well be preventing that person from being able to get accessible treatment as fast as possible for what they're already going through, by putting someone with pretty severe, maybe cancer diagnosis or some other disease, into a quarantine facility far from their location, maybe far from their providers. And so those are the kind of logistical things that have been causing more and more frustrations. But Vosh will never say this. He'll never say the specifics. He'll just give these very abstract points and not even tell you the reality of the situation, which is that China has literally tried everything. And I'm going to go over this afterward. Well, China has actually responded to this as well. It's responded to this very limited, very brief, very small in scale unrest, which does have a foreign interference element, which I'll talk about in a bit.
Are literally locked in their homes. They're given, provisions day to day, week to week, month to month. They're not allowed to go out and do stuff. They're constantly tracked and surveilled by the state. It's fully incorporated. I mean, look at this. All of this is being exacerbated by the behavior of a surveillance state. Chinese police search people's phones after anti-lockdown protests erupt across the country. It goes beyond just the COVID lockdown. It's that the entire apparatus for the control of the citizenry is being refined through COVID-19. In a way, COVID-19 is good for the Chinese government because it gives them a pretty clear excuse to roll out a lot of these measures.
So again, right, we're talking about someone who's deeply not serious about politics. They're going through a mainstream media article as if it's just 100% fact, right? There's no critical thinking here. This is just I think it's the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, right? Wholly anti-China, has snubbed Daniel Dumbrill in an interview, completely distorted the content of what he was trying to say about the Uyghur human rights situation and all of that. So we know about the CBC, but of course, Vaush is just like, oh, well, China's checking the phones. The Chinese government's checking people's phones. Now, he's going to say something pretty shocking in a second, but I just wanted to put this out there about the foreign interference, right? In Shanghai, especially, but even in Beijing, a lot of these protests were happening right near the U.S. embassy, right near the U.S. consulate services as well. And there have already been many reports and accounts. Brian Berletic and Carl Zah reported on it in their recent program today. And of course, I covered it with Garland Nixon and Margaret Kimberly here not a week ago. And I showed you how there has been direct Western interference into these protests. Doesn't mean that there weren't any protests that were genuine. Doesn't mean people protest in China all the time, contrary to the narrative that China is so authoritarian and no one can protest there. No, hundreds of protests, thousands of protests happen every single year, year on and year out. They happen over and over and over again. However, these protests did have a color revolution element to them because you had journalists, Western journalists, a lot of them from the U.S. agency for global media, the former Board of Broadcasting Governors. You had Radio Free Asia in there. You also had the New York Times. You had BBC also doing this, where they were going to Telegram groups and they were organizing with certain protesters, many of whom are suspected to be Hong Kong and Taiwan opposition protesters, to travel to these areas and stir up trouble and do so on a professional basis. So if the Chinese government in these locations has any reason to believe that this is occurring, then regardless of whatever you think of it, the Chinese government has the right to check cell phones in that case, right? What do you do if you're a country like China under siege from the United States, from US imperialism, and you have literal Western corporate media elements backed by billions of dollars literally interfering and trying to cause unrest in your country? That is, to me, an act of covert warfare, of proxy warfare, and it is subject to measures like this one. However, we can't even confirm that this was happening because despite the fact that you had these Western corporate media journalists trying to organize unrest, they did absolutely zero journalism. So this is all just hearsay, as it always is about China, and we cannot take it seriously, and therefore we can't take Vaush seriously. But let's continue.
Checking phones for VPNs. I mean, this is not something American police would do because American police are stupid and don't know what a VPN is or a phone. American police just yell really loud and hope the info gets to who they want it to.
So how awful. I mean, that is just, hold on. Let me just fast forward a little bit, get off that image. Well, that's an even uglier one. Look, how ridiculous is it for him to say that U.S. police would never would never check VPNs, right? They're too stupid to do that. Well, regardless of whether we think cops are smart enough, we gotta understand that the Mapping Police uh, Violence Project has already shown that in 2022, um, there have been more people killed than in any year on record. That's a fact, okay? This is a fact. More people on record in 2022 have been killed by police, okay? So we have to understand that the US police are not, they're not some kind of benign institution. They're not some kind of I just want to show you this. Okay, I'm gonna show. I have it. I'll show you the tweet. I'll let me take Vosh off for a second and show you the real deal about U.S. police. So if you want to talk about the police being dumb, whatever, that's not even serious politics. Okay, you're just talking about police not being smart. But there's more to this. It's not that police just are not smart. It's that they're murderous, that they are a repressive force, that they are literally doing way more than anything that is reported on China. Here is the Mapping Police Violence Project. They have found that police have killed at least 1,054 people through November 27, 2022. Police are killing people at higher rates in 2022 than at any year on record in the United States. And let me just tell you that the police don't keep this data already. They're not keeping this data. So it's not like it's something that we're able to really follow. We're not able to really understand the gravity of this project because the US federal government is not keeping this information. So here we have a major problem. We have the problem of Vosh making light of US police department, trying to say that China is much scarier. Chinese police don't really kill. I mean, I've never heard of someone since, let's say, in the last decade dying at the hands of Chinese local police, because Chinese local police don't even really have guns. So they don't have guns. They don't carry guns in the streets. So how is it that Vosh can make light of US police violence when literally what the US police departments, local police departments do is by far more grim, more violent, more oppressive than anything you could imagine Chinese local police doing. So here is what you have with Vosh. You have someone who is deeply unserious, not really talking about politics, and then when he does, he's making light of a situation that is just completely insulting, I think, to the intelligence of, I would hope, his viewers, but really to any kind of real conversation about the subject that he's talking about, which are these protests, because he's not really talking about them at all. He's just saying that Chinese police are bad. They're checking phones for VPNs. No evidence. He didn't even go over the article. He just went over the headline, and now he's lazily brushing through this because he's just here to promote the anti-China talking points and the State Department talking points, which are flooded in the Western corporate
Like,
media.
the way the COVID lockdown is being enforced in China is, in my opinion, like kind of a fundamentally unethical one, because it's one that is being sort of entirely channeled through the power of the surveillance state. I'm not necessarily opposed to lockdowns, but the way China has gone about it seems to me more like COVID is like a priority, but like what's really important is refining the systems by which you control people. Again, I'm not opposed to lockdowns. I think we should have locked down harder back at the beginning of the pandemic. Keep in mind, the goal is to keep the transmission rate low enough that not so many people get sick at once that you don't overflood the hospitals. That's the goal. They've been saying that since day one. Conservatives, they screech, they cry, they shit, they piss themselves, but they never come because their dicks don't work unless they're actively getting cucked. When they
Like what? Like we have once again veered way off the subject. He's talking about some stuff I would never put on my channel anyway. So sorry, apologies to all of you for having to hear that. But also, he's not even talking about the subject anymore. He's just talking about how lockdowns are not that bad, but China's are. And just a quick note on that. Regardless of what you have thought about China's lockdown policies, right? I think, China has their system, and a lot of people supported this, especially early on, especially even up until now. So, that's for the Chinese people to decide. But one thing you can't refute is that what China did actually worked. China kept deaths low. China kept transmission relatively low. And, they saved a lot of lives, especially in the beginning when the virus was much more virulent and much more deadly. In the United States, you didn't have any of that. You had this haphazard mess that hurt people economically in a really bad way. In China, you didn't have that. People were protected. People's jobs were protected. The economy actually grew during the height of this pandemic. Remember that. Don't forget that China's economy actually grew, well, only by a couple of percent, which is low for China, but it did grow. And so China protected people. China protected people's livelihoods. And that didn't happen in the United States, and that's the fundamental difference that Vosh is not talking about here.
hear this, but we have extremely positive data on the effectiveness of lockdowns in a variety of countries, not just America. You can take a look at South Korea,
Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip over this.
low enough that the hospitals don't get overfull. Clearly not working because, again, we have, you want the death rate to be low. What's happening with China right now is clearly not working because, again, we have no idea whether or not this data is accurate. We have no idea. It's probably not. But what we're seeing here is kind of like a boom and bust cycle, where you'll have periods of really, really, really high cases and then a bunch of nothing. And what this means
Did you hear this? I mean, watch. I'll give you a little bit more. Hold on.
is like the hospitals get flooded, nothing. Flooded, nothing. And that's not ideal. You want to.
So, first of all, this is just fake news. He went over the initial outbreak in Wuhan saying everything was flooded. And then the hospitals did get flooded, especially in February 2020. At that time, the hospitals were overwhelmed. And then they did a lot. China did a lot to ease the situation. And then he said a whole lot of nothing. He's looking at a line graph, right? He's looking at a bell curve graph over the course of almost 3 years now. And he's trying to say that you had flood. It's like a boom bust cycle. Absolutely not. Most of that is absolutely there's nothing. There's no activity because there were very few cases in China, and life was actually relatively normal up until this latest outbreak. Ask anybody. He doesn't know anyone in China. He doesn't talk to any Chinese journalists. He doesn't talk to any Chinese people, activists, anything. He doesn't do that. But ask anybody who spent any time in China during the pandemic. They will say that their lives have been way more normal than anyone that they know in the West or from anything that they observe in the West. And that's because the virus was not as disruptive. They kept measures very strict at some points, and then for most of it, it's been way more loose. There's been way more open for way longer in China than in the United States or the UK or anywhere else. So that is a complete fake news lie. And now he's trying to show this recent upsurge as being a reason to say that there are actually hospitals being flooded. And that's also not true, because the way China has handled this, there are actually fewer people going to the hospital. And that's just because, in general, that's what's happening. There are fewer people in the aggregate going into the hospitals for COVID-19. So he's just spewing fake news here about China in order to make an anti-China point, because that's what it is. He wants to tell you that the Communist Party is way worse than anything that the United States has to offer. That's his whole bag, his whole game here.
Flatten it as much as possible. There are probably better ways China could be doing this lockdown business, but I think in order for them to do that stuff better, they would have to loosen up on the systems of control they're obsessed with maintaining. The Chinese government is not in a good position right now. Its economy is stalling. Its economy doesn't seem to be as large as it has claimed it is. They're running right up against a labor shortage as the population boom they had some 60 years ago finally hits retirement, and their relatively smaller working age population has to support a larger elderly population. That's going to suck for them. They do not have like a clean age progression. They don't have the perfect, like, slanted, normal distribution. They have a declining birth rate. There's a lot of stuff that's not looking great for China right now, and that's really bad for the Chinese government because
So I'll end it there, because all he's going to say from here is that, oh, well, all these problems are leading to the need for the Chinese government to be harsher around COVID and whatnot. I don't have to subject you to the last 3 minutes of this, but that last point that he's making here is important to deconstruct, because what he's saying is that China has all these problems, right? Birth rate. China is an older society, right? All of these problems that China has, it's absolutely it's absolutely devastating for China, right? The Chinese economy isn't as big as they say it is. Well, first off, here are just the facts of the situation. One, regardless of whether you think China's economy is as big as they say it is now, I don't even know what that means. The fact of the matter is that China is the second largest economy in the world, number one. Also, China is going to surpass the United States in under a decade from now. So China will be, in GDP terms, in gross domestic product terms, the largest economy very soon. And that's just the facts. I don't even know why he would pontificate such a thing, because he obviously doesn't know anything about it. But that's just that's all the mainstream Western economists are saying this. It's not even a mystery anymore. But all this stuff about birth rate and aging society, these are things that are well within China's capability of addressing. And I'll say this about China's COVID measures and what's happening right now. China is responding to this unrest, which was brief, and I will say this, brief and small in scale. But really, what it's responding to is a more general sentiment in Chinese society among masses of people that there has to be a way to now balance people's lives and COVID-19 in a more a flexible manner, meaning that China didn't abandon people's needs during COVID-19. Now, everything that Vosh was saying there was just propaganda, because China eliminated extreme poverty during the height of the pandemic. I don't want to hear anything about, oh, China is not meeting people's needs and it's putting the pandemic first and only. That was never the case. China was moving on absolute poverty, and it eliminated it in November of 2020. That was the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And they did it. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that there aren't still problems that are now facing um, a more difficult road to address. China has big goals. It has big goals to modernize further, to become a modern socialist country by 2050, and to achieve actual modernization, socialist modernization by 2035. So it has these big goals. And unfortunately, the international situation, the world economy, the world capitalist economy is not in good shape. And so China's economy actually is probably going to deal with some headwinds and some challenges because of the global situation. And so there has to be more attention to how can China, right? There was a report sent out all across China talking about, and it was all leaking all over Weibo and everything, saying that there needs to be a balance between people's needs and the needs of COVID-19. Like, it's not pandemic first, it's people first. And so here you have a situation where the landscape of COVID-19 is changing. The world is learning now that, regardless of what your politics are around this, it's something that's here to stay. And so, how is China going to adjust to that reality globally? And it seems like their response has actually been pretty quick with that. And now they're changing course pretty quickly. And so, of course, Vosh will never tell you that when you protest in China, things happen. Right now, you have, and here's the Global Times reporting yesterday saying that cities all across the country, 19 of them, have scrapped tests to use public transit, and that more are exploring downgrading of COVID management generally. So, this is Chinese media. This is the state media. This is the so called party controlled media. They're talking about the weak virulence of Omicron and that the majority of infections are mild and asymptomatic in China, that Chinese public health experts are discussing the necessity of downgrading the management of COVID-19 response as China has always adjusted its epidemic policies in accordance with the changing situation with the aim of protecting its people at the maximum level. So China may say that they're easing things, and they're doing this in cities across the country, and they have responded not just to this unrest, because this was going on way before the protest, but they're responding to a changing situation, and they're still going to protect people. They're going to encourage people to take their vaccines, especially the elderly, because they have like 90% vaccination rate with their vaccines, which aren't mRNA vaccines, whatever that's worth. And of course, the Western corporate media is like, why don't they take our vaccines? It's so irresponsible. China's going to take Sinopharm. They're going to take their vaccines and get over it. But at the same time, they're still going to go about this in a fundamentally different way than the United States. It's not lying flat. It's not saying, well, there's no problem now. Yeah, because you still will have people dying of COVID-19. So they're going to keep implementing measures, but they're not going to prioritize COVID-19 over people's economic livelihoods, or they're going to do a better job balancing that and balancing other needs of their society. And that's just the end of the story when it comes to this issue. And for me, it just feels like it's so disingenuous when you hear someone who doesn't know anything about China, who doesn't know anything about socialism, who doesn't know anything about what it means for a country that has experienced more than a century's worth of imperialist humiliation at the hands of foreign Western powers, what it means for any kind of protest to erupt inside of the country that has an element of foreign interference. What we're talking about here is China doing what I think is actually quite remarkable, which is being able to manage the needs of its society, whether we're talking about pandemics, poverty, environment, all of that, right? Vosh said China can only do surveillance. Well, actually, China leads the world in renewable energy production. It leads the world in the production of high technology of all kinds. It leads the world in high-speed rail. It leads the world in the amount of people lifted out of poverty in the last 40 years. It accounts for nearly all poverty reduction in the last 40 years. It leads the world in so many things like that. It also now has surpassed the United States in life expectancy. So obviously China does something, it does way more than what Vosh says. It's not just that China is good at surveillance and good at repression, right? All of those claims don't have any real evidence in reality. There's no basis in reality for that, because the fact of the matter is that most people support the Chinese government in China. Most people support the Communist Party of China in China. So really, I think what is necessary here is for Vosh to look in the mirror, and for anyone who's taken by people like Vosh, taken by his stances and his positions on things like China, to look in the mirror and say, well, am I being lied to? And what is the truth here? Well, the truth is that you're being lied to, and that the imperialist propaganda only has one purpose, and that is to reinforce and to promote the US's endless war regime, which has China now as its target. So I am going to end the Vosh segment of this. All right. It looks like we have 385 viewers right now, 400 likes. So thanks so much. Keep sharing this around, of course, and be sure to keep getting people in here. The best way to support this program is on patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. It's the beginning of the month. Please do consider supporting this completely independent media. I only rely on people who view my work, who read my work. So any contribution is very much appreciated. You can do that on Patreon. Links are in the description. There's also Substack. There's also one-time donation options. You can leave a tip. You can leave a super chat tip on Rockfin. You can leave a super chat. I'll thank people who send super chats at the end. But let's get to the next segment, all right? I'm going to take these off for a second. So, you all know John Mearsheimer, probably. Early on in the U.S.-led proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, John Mearsheimer was going viral. He was someone who is considered, he's an academic. He works at the University of Chicago. He's a distinguished professor of international relations there. And he's considered this like realist scholar. And his position went viral. And it was a very simple position. It was that the United States, that the West was actually primarily responsible for what was happening as of February 2022 with regard to Ukraine, because it was the United States and the West which sponsored a coup in 2014, and even before that in 2008 flirted with NATO. So Ukraine had been destabilized in 2014. There had been aims to integrate Ukraine into NATO since 2008, and that over the last 8 years, it was the West that was fermenting, that was escalating, and that was provoking Russia into now this current conflict, which we are now more than 9 months in the making, entering month 10. And boy, are things getting hot. I'll see if I have time to do a Ukraine update at the end, but I may not have time tonight. But nonetheless, we're talking about John Mearsheimer, at least for the time being. And he's someone that I was never too impressed with. Yes, it's great when an academic can say something true, something real about imperialism. We get it so very rarely. Most of the time, mainstream Western academia is carrying water for the war machine. That's what it's doing. That's what it primarily does. However, you know, John Mearsheimer has a very contradictory position that I wanted to talk about, because this is a blind spot that a lot of people actually have in the West in general. For those who are very critical of the US's aggressive posture toward Russia, who believe what's happening in Ukraine is a proxy war, a literal US provocation to draw Russia into Ukraine so that it can work on conducting regime change in Moscow by weakening Russia through this proxy war. For those who believe that, there are a lot of people in that camp who also believe that China is a literal threat, quote unquote threat, who believe that while Russia isn't a threat, China is a threat. And I think this is a huge problem that we are facing right now, because it distorts the reality of the situation that the US, through NATO and through its so-called allies and through its imperialist alliances and military escalations and all of the policies that it has abroad, that its foreign policy, it's all geared toward waging a two-front war, to getting to the point where Russia and China are attacked together, right? That they are being fought together. And I want to play you a recent interview. And I'm going to start a recent interview that John Mearsheimer did, because I think what it shows is that this blind spot is deeper than we think. And he actually says it very profoundly and clearly why this is the case. And I'll tell you why this is the case, that this blind spot exists. It's because you have a section of the ruling elite which has successfully propagandized others into believing that Russia isn't a threat, but China is. And the hope is that they can drive a wedge. There's a wedge theory that's been going on since the end of the Cold War. The Wolfowitz doctrine had this also at heart, which is to drive a wedge between Russia and China by using Russia's weakness to its advantage against China as a new Cold War kind of ramps up. That's really the point here. So let's play this interview, and we'll, you'll see what I mean here.
Let's turn our attention eastward towards what is not yet a crisis, but many people think might be a crisis on the horizon, around Taiwan and China. Learning what we've learned from this conflict, what would you like to see the West's approach to that issue be?
Well, I have a fundamentally different view on China than I do on Russia. And therefore, my thinking about Taiwan is different than my thinking about Ukraine. I believe that China is a peer competitor of the United States, and that it is a threat to dominate Asia the way the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. And the United States does not tolerate other regional hegemons. We're a regional hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. And over time, we have gone to great lengths to prevent countries like.
So there you have it. He's very clear about it from the beginning. He believes the U.S. is a regional hegemon. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. But what he believes is that China is an actual peer competitor. All that means in his speak, because this is kind of his theory, is that great powers, right, need to be identified, and that China is a great power, and that it actually is a peer competitor, meaning that it is of equal status with the United States, and thus is an actual threat. And so that's all he's saying here already, just making clear that he has no problems with the way that the United States handles its foreign policy toward China.
Like Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union from dominating either Europe or Asia. From an American point of view, that's unacceptable. And I think that's correct. I think the United States should not want China to dominate Asia the way we dominate the Western Hemisphere.
So that, I mean, the propaganda, the position is clear. The United States can't, it should not want China to dominate, right? First of all, there's a lot of projection going on here. China doesn't operate in Asia like the United States operates in Latin America, for example. That's well documented and well proven. China isn't going to Malaysia, Myanmar, and any country along the South China Sea, for example. It's not saying, well, you're my backyard and I'm going to put my military installations here and I'm going to overthrow your government and install a puppet government. I'm going to support judicial coups like in Brazil. I wanted to support actual coups like in Paraguay, Honduras, right? China's not doing that. But here you still have Mearsheimer using Cold War. This is how you know he's a neoliberal. This is how you know that he's more aligned with the neocons than he is not. He is using Cold War rhetoric, saying that, well, the Soviet Union was a pure competitor and we didn't want socialism out there in Eastern Europe. So that's why we needed NATO. That's what he's really saying there, because that's why NATO formed. We need to do the same thing that we did then to China now. So he looks at China like the Soviet Union. And I got to give him credit. At the very least, he's honest. He's honest in the sense that he is such a deeply committed capitalist and neocon that he understands that at the very least, China is socialist and China is different. But here he's using propaganda to try to tell you differently, that actually China is a boogeyman and a threat. really this response is coming from a deep rejection of everything China is all about. And he'll get more into why he believes Russia is different. And I think this should interest anyone who is trying to navigate some pretty muddy waters when it comes to this big blind spot that people have around Russia and China.
So we're going to go to great lengths to contain China. And for purposes of containing China, it is important for us to defend Taiwan. And from a Chinese point of view, this is categorically unacceptable. Taiwan, from a Chinese point of view, is sacred territory. And the fact that the West is preventing China from reincorporating Taiwan into its body politic is a cause of anger, real anger. So what's happening here is that as the security competition between China and the United States ratchets up in East Asia, the United States becomes more committed than ever to defending Taiwan, to keeping Taiwan allied with the United States and its other allies in East Asia, infuriating the Chinese more and more. So you have this intense security competition setting in. And at the heart of that intense security competition is this potential point of conflict, Taiwan, that threatens to escalate and cause a war.
But
So this is what's hilarious about this, and the interviewer is about to get into it, is that he's almost happy about it. I mean, this is academics can be so, how can I say, detached, right? He feels detached. He feels like he's not into this. That what he's into this more as a point of study rather than the real world consequences. So he's willing to throw out his analysis around Ukraine, right? He's willing to say, well, okay, Ukraine is a proxy war. It's the West's fault, and Russia was provoked. But with China, he's willing to just flip that and say, well, China, it's fine. The U.S. should defend Taiwan around China, even though this is going to escalate into war. So really, Mearsheimer is both saying that he knows this is going to escalate into war, that it's threatening that direction. He knows that this is making China very, very, very angry because China sees Taiwan as part of its sovereign territory, and still his position is the opposite of his position around Ukraine. I mean, to me, there's no more cognitive dissonance here, and it just shows how deep this blind spot can be, that you have two parallel processes happening that have very deep connections to each other, Ukraine and Taiwan, right? One to provoke Russia, one to provoke China. And even though the China situation is even more dangerous, in my opinion, and also even more of a violation of sovereignty, because you don't even have the veneer of Ukraine being a sovereign country like you do with as opposed to Taiwan. Those things are different, right? Taiwan is not a sovereign country, but Ukraine is. And so you don't even have the veneer that Ukraine has to shield it, at least in the mainstream discourse, even if we know better. But still, Mearsheimer is saying that, well, this threatens war, but the U.S. needs to defend Taiwan, and they're doing it so passionately. And now I want you to see how this interviewer reacts, because I think it's a good question. I think it's a good way to segue.
I think viewers or listeners might be surprised to hear you on that, because in a sense it's the opposite of your view of the Russia question, that even though China is a regional hegemon, Taiwan is, whether they consider it part of Greater China or whether it's just too close to have as allied with a foreign power, there is a parallel to Ukraine and Russia. But in that example, you think it is in the strategic interests of the US to actually send forces, risk a greater escalation, and actually go to war if necessary to defend Taiwan.
Yeah, I think the situation with China is a lot like the situation with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. I believe the United States had a deep-seated interest in preventing the Soviet Union from dominating all of Europe and dominating all of Asia.
So there you go. Deflection, right? He's asking about, well, your position is contradictory to what you're saying with Russia. Now he's talking about the Soviet Union. So let's continue.
For sure. The Soviet Union was a peer competitor of the United States. And I think the United States has a vested interest in making sure that it is the only regional hegemon of the planet and that the Soviet Union not dominate Europe. With regard to Russia today, as I said earlier, Russia is by far the weakest of the three great powers. It is no threat to dominate all of Europe or Asia. And therefore, the United States doesn't have to pay much attention to Russia. China, on the other hand, is a peer competitor. It's not a regional hegemon yet. What the United States has to do, in my opinion, is prevent it from becoming a regional hegemon.
So, I mean, there you have it. That's the point I wanted to make. And he just says it plainly to you. Russia is weak. China is not weak. The United States should focus its energy on provoking China, encircling China, getting into a new Cold War with China, defending Taiwan, quote unquote, aka violating China's sovereignty over Taiwan in order to weaken China, right? Really, what Mearsheimer is saying is that the U.S. is in the wrong war. It shouldn't be in a proxy war with Russia because Russia is weak. It should, and I I actually disagree with that. I think Russia is actually much stronger. It would be performing much differently in this conflict in Ukraine if it were quote unquote weak. But the point is that it's not a quote unquote pure competitor. And I will say that if we were to reframe this from this kind of pure competitive mentality where like China and the United States are operating on level planes and that they have very similar aims and motives, and that China is just at equal status when it comes to these things. And if we were to reframe it to what the reality is, which is that China actually is a different model, different economic model, a different political model, a different way of cooperating with nations around the world, a different growth model, right? Socialism with Chinese characteristics, if we look at all that it's achieved, and now it's moving into this position where it's a leader in a multipolar world, then yeah, it does represent an existential so-called quote-unquote threat to the US's hegemony and its power and its domination and its ability to reproduce the interests of its tiny elite. Yeah, we can say that's the case. But here, John Mearsheimer is not saying that. He's just promoting wedge theory as a neoliberal and a neocon, saying that the point should be to weaken Russia. To weaken China using Russia. And now I'm going to show you, this is not a fringe position. Actually, I would argue that this position is essentially the mainstream position among the so-called GOP, right? Among the so-called China hawks, right? This is the position of a lot of different forces in the United States, and it has been for quite a long time, but no more significant than now, since the conflict between Russia and China, or the conflict between the United States toward Russia and China, has never been hotter. So here you have, even today you have Josh Hawley, U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. You all remember him. He's a notorious China hawk, saying that Taiwan is more important than Ukraine. So Mearsheimer mirrors Josh Hawley, who's saying that arms deliveries should be going to Taipei, to Taiwan, not Ukraine. So here's RT's report on this. He said that Taiwan is more important to U.S. national interests and that Washington's aid money for Kiev would be better spent at home. But really what he's saying is that it would be better sent to Taiwan, and that Ukraine's military bolstering it with armed stockpiles is neglecting our vital security interests in Asia, and that he contended that the outflow of weapons should immediately be diverted. So first he's saying, oh, it should help. We should use money to help people at home. And then he's saying send the weapons to Taiwan instead, right? because arming Taiwan would make it extremely difficult if China were to launch a hypothetical military assault on the island. Regardless of the weapon source, if both Taiwan and Ukraine need them, they should go to Taiwan first, Hawley said, suggesting Germany or other NATO allies focus on supplying Ukraine instead. So there you have it. I mean, you have this as a mainstream position. This isn't Mearsheimer being some kind of how should I say? He's not being a hold on. Oh, there you go. He's not being some kind of contrarian here, right? He is literally just articulating the situation. Let me see if there's anything left to play here. There might not be anything. Let me see. Let's see what else is left here.
And the problem that we face is that Taiwan is of enormous strategic importance to us. We have a deep-seated interest in defending Taiwan for strategic reasons. And the Chinese, on the other hand, again, view this as sacred territory. And this is what makes this such a dangerous situation. But I think about China much differently than I think about Russia.
So, in fact,
so that's it. I mean, I don't have to play any more of that because that's the point I wanted to make, is that there is a dangerous trend going on right now, a really dangerous trend going on in the United States, in the collective West, really, where you have people, because this war in Ukraine is becoming a quagmire, because it's becoming kind of untenable for the ruling class to manage. You have a situation where I mean, this isn't going well, right? You already have so many instances of this. So many, and I'm going to close just with just some brief updates because they really do support this point. So John Mearsheimer is saying that we need to, really what he's doing is he's forwarding a military doctrine. He's saying that actually where the focus needs to be is on Taiwan and not China. He didn't say one China policy once. He didn't say one China principle at all. He didn't talk about the United States' agreements or the UN resolution, which codifies the fact that Taiwan is part of China. He didn't bring up any of that because he is forwarding a military doctrine saying that actually what the United States is doing is incorrect. It needs to be allying itself with Russia. It needs to be stopping its conflict with Russia and moving against China. And so I think, a big reason why this is the case, a huge reason why this is the case, is because you already have a situation with the Ukraine conflict. It was always a losing battle, right? The United States is not prepared to fight either of these countries, really. It's not really prepared to do so, and it's already shown this through what's happening now, where you have the Pentagon saying it's running out of money for Ukraine. You have NATO saying it's running out of weapons, that Kiev is going to be reportedly left without new American shells and improved howitzers because of the budget deal. There's a lot of conflict around it. But you do also have, it's not just about the budget. It's not just about the fact that NATO is running out of weapons, but it's also the fact of time. There's time not on the side of Ukraine, right? Winter is here. You have Russia still conducting these missile strikes, which are pulverizing Kiev's power grid. Now, Kiev is doing very dangerous things like firing missiles on Russia's territory, using certain drone technology on Russia's territory. A very big mistake, because that means Russia is going to feel compelled to escalate even further. And we know that hundreds of thousands of Russian troops are on the way to the front lines very soon. So time is not on their side. And you also have the situation that this economic war is very counterproductive, and it's only escalating. You have now an oil price cap at $60 a barrel being enforced by the European Union and the United States, trying to starve Russia, trying to get rid of third parties from being able to use shipping and insurance and all of that, all dominated by U.S. and Western corporations, trying to starve Russia even further by eliminating the possibility of Russia selling its oil to third parties. And Russia is, of course, going to retaliate, and it's going to probably cut oil production. And that is only going to raise prices and put the hurt further on the US and Western political economy, on the global economy, on the capitalist economy. This is not looking good. So, really, what I'm showing you now are just brief snippets of how things aren't going well in Ukraine. And you have now Macron. This isn't the first time he's done this, but Russia has said that they are going to consider. You have Emmanuel Macron saying that despite all of the United States is, we love you, France, we love you. France is now saying, and Germany has said this too, that NATO has to prepare security guarantees for Russia now around neutrality with NATO and Ukraine and other things, because this war is not going the way that the United States, that the way that they would want it to go. It's not going in the direction they want it to go. It's going to be it is a quagmire. It's only going to get worse. And so you have a lot of different things happening. You still have escalations toward Russia, but you also have this growing realization that this isn't working. And so this contradiction is going to come to a head. There's going to be some shift in policy, whether voices like Macron's are once again kind of pushed down and repressed. And guess what? Macron, he's not going to fight it, because what has the European Union done but basically bow down to the United States and say, yes, we'll fight your war for you, and we'll do way more than even what you're willing to do to fight this war, right? This has been the case since the very beginning of this thing, and it's only going to continue to be the case unless the United States decides that this actually has to cool off for at least a little bit, and that there is a move towards some kind of security guarantee, some kind of negotiations. I don't see that coming down the road. I don't see Ukraine behaving in a way that will allow that to happen. I also don't see the EU having any kind of spine to push that to happen. So essentially, what we have here is John Mearsheimer saying that Taiwan is of real security and strategic interest to the United States, not Ukraine. But you really have the military-industrial complex saying differently. While they're running out of weapons and they can't supply Ukraine in the way that they have been for so long now, since the beginning of this conflict, they still want to do it. And they also want to do Taiwan too. Now, Taiwan is a different kind of situation. And I think this is what John Mearsheimer is hinting at, is that he is probably hoping, along with probably the tiny minority of people like him, they are probably hoping that they can somehow get into some more manageable, slower, kind of slow rolling conflict with China that's been happening since 2012, right? This pivot to Asia, slowly build up the defenses of Taiwan, so that when war does break out, when the US decides it's time to wage war there, that Taiwan is prepared. That's probably in Mearsheimer's mind what he's thinking, because guess what? He's an international relations analyst. He was trained at the Council on Foreign Relations. These people are just war hawks. And I don't care if he had one correct position on Ukraine. The fact of the matter is that he's still speaking through the state, the military state apparatus. That's what he's doing. And he's doing it because it's profitable for them. And he's just giving different business advice. And so here, what you have is a situation where people like Mearsheimer, they have these huge blind spots because they're not actually anti-war. They're not anti-capitalist. They're not anti-neoliberal. They're not anti-neocon. They're not anti-anything. They are simply all about trying to find the correct position for the elite, to put them in the position to wage the kind of wars that are effective. And Mearsheimer, I think, is highly mistaken here, because he thinks what's more effective is a war with China over time at some point in the future, while Russia could be an ally. I think that for someone who's considered to be so smart, that couldn't be any further from the truth, right? There's nothing further from the truth than the fact that, one, Russia's not going to be your ally now. Look at all that's happened. There's no reversing course here. You've staged nuclear weapons. There's already been false flags. The Nord Stream pipelines are destroyed. The sanctions are there, and the EU and the US have no political will to withdraw those economic sanctions unless there's some kind of full course reversal in policy. Can you imagine Russia saying, well, we're just your allies now? But that's what Mearsheimer wants to happen, and it's a fantasy. And not only that, but it's also a fantasy to think that you can break up Russia and China at the moment. These two countries not only have deep political and military security interests together, fighting what is a global hegemon, the United States, trying to destroy their societies and their ways of life. But you also have the fact that these two countries have so much more in common as Asian countries, as countries that, that share borders, that share a whole Eurasian region that they want to integrate. They have similar visions for that. There's just no reason for these two countries to really ever fight again short of some kind of regime change scenario. And that's why the warmongering is so hot right now. But John Mearsheimer can't see it. And so, that's why he talks the way he does. That's why he doesn't say one China principle. He doesn't talk about peace in the same way. He doesn't talk about negotiations between China and the United States. China is the socialist boogeyman. China is the real so-called quote unquote threat, and it must be destroyed accordingly. And so we have to be very careful about any of these forces out there who talk like this, right? Anyone who claims to be a friend of peace when it comes to Russia, but not the same when it comes to China. That kind of inconsistency is not just incorrect. It is patently dangerous, and we need to call it out, and we need to point it out whenever it emerges, because it's way more dangerous than the neocons and the hawks and all of those who will show you and tell you right to your face that both China and Russia are the enemies. At the very least, we can forge strategic unity based on opposition to that. So I'm going to end the segments here. Only a couple. I mean, I can probably get a couple of segments out of each one of these. So that's it for the content for tonight, but stick around. I'll be on for another probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Definitely want to give a thank you to those who gave super chats. I saw some coming through. Why am I putting on my headphones again? Let's see. All right, let's go through the super chats. We have about 380 people watching now, 516 likes. So thanks to everyone who liked this stream. A little less attended than usual. I was pulling in like 1,000 per stream for like 3 straight streams at least. Okay. Hopefully we can get back to that over time, but I definitely appreciate everyone who's able to come out tonight. All right, let's see. Super chats. All right, and send any that you have in the meantime while I'm going through these. So thank you, Notary S. So rumor Biden is willing to meet with Putin. Sachs wrote about in Common Dreams. Think the opportunity is legit? Well, Jeffrey Sachs is a smart guy, and this guy is not. I'm going to talk to him about this maybe on Monday, next Monday when I talk to him. I think the opportunity is legit? I would not be surprised if the situation economically. So you have a lot of this hand wringing right now, right? You've seen it, right? It's like the economy is amazing. It's incredible. The unemployment couldn't be better, right? There's all of this like everything is fine. And usually when everything is being told to you that it's fine by these professional liars, the political class, it is not fine. When you hear gas prices are on their way down and they keep going down and down and up, it's likely that things are going to get worse. This price cap situation is going to make it worse. And of course, just a general situation of, well, it's December 6th now. It's going to be this late December, January, February, very soon. It's going to get worse. So I do think that there is a real crisis afoot, and it could be that if there is some slowing with this, that it could buy some time so things can, I think what would be ultimately hoped for the United States is that any kind of negotiations would lead to just kind of a temporary stalemate in order for this to restart when the winter is over. That is kind of how I see it. I don't think that there is like, oh, well, there's going to be lasting peace when it comes to the Ukraine situation. I don't see that. But I do think that the level of desperation is actually higher than we might think. Now, we may think that neocons and the war hawks are so committed to their project that they would never allow this to happen. And I'm not going to say that's inaccurate. That surely is not incorrect. However, it is also to say that sometimes the conditions of the situation, the moment of history that you're in, does not allow you to just do whatever the hell you want to do. And that moment seems to be right now. And so we'll see where it ends up. But I don't have any faith that such a thing will actually happen. But Jeffrey Sachs is usually very smart on these things. And I would say that if he believes that there's some opportunity, that there may be people who have told him that there's an opportunity. So thank you, JM, for the super sticker or super chat. And thanks for being a member, for all your generosity. Let's see if there's any more here. Any more? I think there were early on. So let's see. Man, COVID is lame. I'm glad my case was mild though. Definitely glad it was mild. I'm still a little congested, but not a lot. Not a lot. Let's see. I wish there was a better way to organize the super chats. They just, if there's not like, they don't like go anywhere where I can really get them again. Some people like the Duran get so many that they make whole Q&A videos afterward, which I find to be impressive, but also, wow. I mean, that's how you know that you have to go back and organize them afterward. Let's see. Here we go. So thank you so much, Elfon, for that generous super sticker, Hong Kong $100. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so I think that might have been it, actually. Yeah. All right. Looks like that was all for the super chats. We also have a tip on Rockfin. I just want to acknowledge that person. Thank you so much to the Rockfin family. Thank you so much. Who was it who tipped here? Okay. All right. Let me see. I'm just trying to get the right person. Why isn't it showing up? Here we go. It was One Love. Was that you? Okay. I think I actually have their name on a text. Rockfin sends you texts when they tip. Laura Baza. Thank you so much, Laura, for the tip. And then of course I had a Patreon subscriber, actually a new one. So thank you so much to them. Shout them out, actually. Why not? All the love. So yeah, we're growing here, guys. I mean, tonight, it seems like people were saying there are elections. I didn't elections. I guess. Oh, the elections. The Georgia thing, huh? Well, anyway, thank you, Kimberly, for the new Patreon subscription. Of course, that's the best way you can support my work. Patreon.com/Dhaiphong. You can do so annually through one of the tiers, and there's 3 options, and yeah, so you can do that. You can save a bit of money. And also, for those who do certain tiers, you can help shape some of this work that we do here. All right, everyone. So yeah, good stream. Thanks so much for coming out. It's getting late. We got some good stuff coming up. I'm just gonna end on some announcements. All right. So I'm contemplating whether I'm going live tomorrow. Could happen. It might not. So apologies for that. But if I don't go on tomorrow, I will definitely be on Friday because I got a really exciting one. I'll probably start that one at 9 p.m. Eastern. And then at 10 p.m., I will have none other than a good friends of the show, Brian Berletic and Carl Zaw. So we just agreed to that today, and I'll have them on live late Friday night so we can have a nice, fun Friday evening together here talking China, foreign policy, geopolitics. We'll go into it, guys. We'll go into it. And then that Monday after the weekend is over, I will have the none other than Jeffrey Sachs, who Notary S was referencing. I'm actually going to email right after I'm done here their assistant just to make sure that that's all confirmed for Monday at noon. Okay. So yeah, we're growing here. We're continuing to do the work, and let's keep supporting this work, of course. Did a great job, guys, everyone today for liking this video, for those who were able to show. And of course, keep sharing it around. And do what you can, if you can, to help support this independent media. All right, so hit that like button, subscribe, share, notifications bell. But best way to support financially, monetarily, if you're able to on this holiday season, giving gifts to independent media, there's nothing like it. So you can do annual on Patreon, annual on Substack. There are gift subscriptions. If you have a friend who's like could really benefit from this content, send it over to them. Whatever whichever method works for you. You can find all that in the links in the description. So as I get better, okay, as I improve my health, tomorrow may work, tomorrow may not, but I will continue to get clips up here. And Friday we have a big stream coming up. So all right, everyone, take good care, good night, and thanks for coming again. You have been tuning into The Left Lens with Danny Dhaiphong, and I so appreciate all of your support, and I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.